Hi everyone and welcome to Page Style. My name is Patience. In today's video, we are going to be making this beautiful two-tones corporate dress. Before we get started, kindly click the subscribe button. If you have done that, let's get into it. I'll be using 1 yard of gingham fabric, and I'll be using this 2.5 yards of crepe fabric. And I'll be drafting on this pattern paper. I'm going ahead to mark the shoulder line. Right on the shoulder line, I'll mark half of my shoulder measurement, which is 8 inches, plus ½ inch for sewing allowance, that is 8.5 inches. And I'll mark the neck width. I'll be using 3.5 inches, and for the depth I'll also be using 3.5 inches. So this is the front piece. On the back piece I'll be using 2 inches for the neck depth. I'll come down by 1 inch for the shoulder slant, and I'll curve the neck. After doing that, from this 1 inch I will mark my chest line, which is 8 inches. To get a straight line, I will mark from the shoulder, that is 9 inches. I'll bring down the shoulder measurement on the chest line this way and connect the points. And I will mark the midpoint of this line, which is 4 inches. For the front armhole, I'll go in by 3/4 inch, and I'll make a slant line to the tip of the shoulder this way. Now I'll mark my shoulder to bust point, which is 10.5 inches, and I'll mark my shoulder to under bust point. So I am marking the under bust point because of the design I am going to make on this dress, and I'll mark my shoulder to waist and shoulder to hip, that is 26 inches. I'll also mark the full length of this dress, which is going to be 40 inches. You can add 1 inch or 2 inches for hemming allowance. So this is the shoulder line, the chest line, the bust line, under bust line, waist line, hip line, and the full length. To mark the circumference measurement, I will mark 1/4 of my bust circumference, which is 10.5 inches. I'll be adding ½ inch for ease because the fabric is not stretchy, and 1 inch for side seam. I'll leave the bust and the under bust line. I'll come down to the waist line. I'll mark 1/4 of the waist circumference, and I'll add 1/4 inch for ease and 1 inch for side seam. On the hip line, I'll mark 1/4 of my hip circumference and ½ inch for ease and 1 inch for side seam. I'll be making this like a pencil dress. So on the hemline, I am going to minus 1 inch from my hip, 1/4 of my hip circumference, that is 11 inches minus 1 inch, that is 10 inches. So I'll mark 10 inches and I'll add 1 inch for side seam. I will curve the arm side and connect the points. I am going to be making the style on the front piece. To do that, I am going to be cutting it out like a facing. So from my shoulder measurement here, I'll go in by 2.5 inches. To get a straight line to the bust, I am going to mark what I have here from the folded edge, that is 6 inches. So I'll mark 6 inches on the bust line. From the 6 inches, I'll go in by ½ inch. So I'm marking 5.5 inches. because of the arm side. I'll connect this 5.5 inches to this 2.5 inches. Now on the waistline, I'll go in by 2.5 inches. Remember, I added 1 inch for side seam. So I'll mark the 2.5 inches from the 1 inch for side seam. So if I want to mark it from this line, it will be 3.5 inches. Also on the hip line, I'll go in by 2.5 inches plus the 1 inch for side seam, that is 3.5 inches. I'll also mark the same 3.5 inches on the hemline. And I'll connect the points this way. After doing that, on the underbust line, I am going to connect this 3.5 inches to the edge on the underbust line. I'll make a slant line. So you can leave it this way, or you can go down by 1/2 inch from the waist line. You can go down by 1/2 inch and connect it this way. As you can see, this came out even better. So from the underbust line, I'll go up by 1.5 inches and I'll connect the 1.5 inches to this 5.5 inches. So you can leave it this way, or you can go up by 1/2 inch, that is from the 5.5 inches. You can go up by 1/2 inch and also connect it to the 1.5 inches. Now to make the opening on the neck line, I'll go down by 3 inches this way and I'll make a curve this way. I'll add 1/2 inch on the shoulder for sewing allowance. Now I am going to be replicating this measurement on the other side of the pattern paper. To do that, you are going to need a tracing wheel. So I am going to trace out all the measurements this way. After doing this, I am going to use the same marker to trace it out on the other side of the pattern paper. I've done that. So this is how it came out. I'm going to cut it out. Now you don't have to do what I am doing now. I am just enjoying what I am doing. So I'm trying to make you guys understand that this part of the front piece I am designing is going to be a different fabric. So you can mix any type of fabric of your choice. So I'll be using this on this part of the pattern. So I am not going to be cutting this out. I am going to turn it with the neck and it is going to be like a facing. But on this part, I am going to be cutting it out. I am going to keep this aside. I'll be drafting the back piece before I cut it out. On the back piece, I have marked the shoulder line, chest line, waistline, hip line, and the full length. And I also marked 1 inch for the zipper allowance. Starting my measurements from the 1 inch for zipper allowance, I'll mark half of my shoulder measurement, come down by 1 inch and mark 3.5 inches for the width of the neck, and for the depth of the neck I'll be using 2 inches, and I'll curve the neck this way. I'll bring down the shoulder measurement and I am going to connect it this way and mark the midpoint of this line, which is 4 inches. For the back armhole, I'll go in by ½ inch, make a slant line to the tip of the shoulder this way, and I'll mark 1/4 of my bust circumference plus the side seam, also 1/4 of the waist circumference plus the side seam, 1/4 of the hip circumference plus side seam, and also the hemline, and I'll connect it this way. Sorry, I made a mistake here. I'm supposed to connect it to this point, so ignore this line. I'll add ½ inch on the shoulder for sewing allowance. Now, to avoid zip bulge, I am going to mark my shoulder to half length, which is 15 inches. From the 15 inches, you can go in by ½ inch or 3/4 inch, depends on how deep your back is. So from this ½ inch, I am going to make a slant line outside the shoulder this way. And I'll connect the ½ inch on the edge of the hip line this way. And I'll also connect from the hip line inside the hemline this way. Remember, this is a pencil gown, so this is going to give the back its perfect shape. That is it for the back piece. I am going to cut this out on my fabric before I cut out the back tightening. Back to the front piece, I am going to bring another pattern paper and I'll fold it this way, and I'll align the folded edge and pin it down. So I'll be cutting out the neckline. After doing that, I'll use my tracing wheel to trace out this design on the front piece, and I'll trace it out. So to cut it out on my fabric, I'll need a sewing allowance, so I'll add ½ inch this way and cut it out. So this is going to serve as the facing. I am going to mark the opening this way. As you can see, it is going to be at the front piece this way, and I'm going to fold in the ½ inch for sewing allowance. To cut this out, I am going to fold it back this way and cut it out. To join it back, I am going to need a sewing allowance, so I'll add ½ inch on both of the edges. Using the ½ inch for sewing allowance, I am going to join it back this way. You want to make sure to notch all the edges to follow the design when you are joining it back on your fabric. I've gone ahead to cut it out on my fabric, and I made sure to add the ½ inch for sewing allowance. Also on this fabric, I added ½ inch. I've also cut out this. So this is how it is going to come out, and when I am joining, I will make sure to follow the shape this way. On this part, I am going to place the wrong sides together this way, and I am going to pin it down. After doing that, I will sew by 1/4 inch from this point to this point. And I'll make sure I notch before turning it back to the right side. I've gone ahead to cut out the back piece, and I've also cut out the back tightening. I'll still be using my 1 inch for zipper allowance. Now I'll place the right sides together this way, and I am going to mark where my zip will stop. That is 20 inches, and I will sew by 1 inch. I'll also mark the hem line, and I will mark where the slit will stop. So I'll sew by 1 inch, and I'll stop where my slit will stop. I've also cut out a facing for the back piece. I am going to place the right sides together this way, and I'll pin it down. I'll stop at the 1 inch for zipper allowance. Starting from this point, I'll sew by 1/4 inch, and I'll stop at the 1 inch for zipper allowance. So I am going to attach my zip before I finish up the neckline. I've joined this upper part already. I've sewed on the neckline and also the opening, so I pinned down this other part. So I'll be joining this. I'll place the right side this way, and I will make sure to align the midpoint and pin it down, and I'll start sewing, and I'll make sure I follow the shape of the fabric. As you can see, I made sure I follow the shape of the fabric, and this is how it came out, as you can see. So I'll do the same thing on the other side. I'll make sure I follow the shape of the fabric and sew by 1/2 inch. I have done that, and this is how it came out. Now I am going to make a top stitch on this part, and I'll make sure this edge is on the midpoint of the fabric. This is how it came out. I made sure to iron flat on this part. You want to open the stitch and iron flat, and I'll make sure to serge the edges of both fabric. On the back piece, I have attached the facing, and I stopped at the 1 inch for zipper allowance, like I said. And I have also joined the 1 inch. Now I am going to be attaching the zip. So I'll place the right sides together this way on the 1 inch for zipper allowance, and I'll attach the zip. I've done that. I'm going to open up the zip this way, and I'll finish the neckline. I'll sew on top of the zip. I'll do the same thing here, finish up the neckline and sew on top of the zip, and I'll cut out the excess zip. After doing that, I'll sew close to the zipper teeth this way. I have done that, and this is how neat it came out. So after sewing close to the zipper teeth, I trimmed the excess and turn it over this way. We'll make sure to serge. Now I'll be joining the front and the back piece together. So I'll place the right sides this way, and I'll first join the shoulder. So I'll place it this way and pin it down, and I'll sew by 1/2 inch. After doing that, I'll sew on the 1 inch for side seam, and I'll also hem. I've done that. I've joined the side seam and I've also hem. As you can see, I reduced the slit. It was too deep, and I've joined the stitched on the slit. Next thing I am going to do is to cut out the sleeve. I've gone ahead to do that. I have a detailed video on how to draft a basic sleeve. I'll put the link on the description box. I have also hemmed and I've joined the side seam. So the length of the sleeve after hemming is 23.5 inches. Now I am going to attach it to the dress. I've done that and this is how it came out. If you have not subscribed to my channel, what are you waiting for? Kindly give this video a thumbs up and also click on the subscribe button, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell to be notified when I upload a new video. Thank you guys for watching. Bye.